Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines to take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It's the 10th of February, 2026. Let's get started. Now, we've got a problem in America. We have the most incredibly competent, badass military on the planet, but it takes a lot of stuff to keep it going. Like a lot of stuff. A lot of super high-tech equipment, a lot of crazy intellectual property, massive supply chains of rare earth minerals and all this stuff out there. Incredibly hard to come by. High talent labor in a variety of specialty disciplines. And supply chains that stretch all the way around the world, including being fully embedded in some of our main geopolitical rivals, namely China. How great's that? So there's been a lot of talk about, revamping the American supply chain. This has been a very popular topic, even just post-COVID and what we all experienced there. But surprise, surprise, it doesn't appear like much is actually getting done. And it's hard to find who in government's really taking this seriously. But it will likely decide the robustness of our supply chains, the resilience of our industrial base, our defense industrial base, will likely decide the outcome of the next great power conflict that we enter into, or decide if we even need to get into one. So to help us walk through this problem and try to understand what issues might be lurking out there in the closets underneath the carpets of our defense industrial base that might hamstring us in a critical fight with another great power, have a repeat guest on, Jahara Franky Matisek. So glad he could take the time out of his day to come speak with us. He recently published an article in Foreign Policy magazine called How to Fix America's Broken Arsenal. Link will be in the show notes. And excited to get his take on where the trapdoors in our industrial policy are and what we might be able to do to start fixing it. With that, we'll have a quick word from our friends at the Work to Find Network, and then off to our conversation with Franky.
Hi, I'm Col Jahara, host of Directionally Correct, the #1 people analytics podcast in the world. Come check out our podcast that dives deep into topics like people analytics, workforce planning, and talent intelligence, helping leaders across the globe navigate the future of work with insight and a little bit of fun.
Well, good morning, man, and welcome back to the podcast. How you doing today?
Good to see you again, Scott.
So I know you've been on, I think it's maybe your third time on the show now.
Because we did security assistance once, right?
Yep, we did that
Then
one.
the second time was my prediction of the Trump NSS.
Yes, that's right.
Am I a prophet? Did it all come true?
I don't know. You'll have to come back on to talk about that. Oh, God. On paper or in realities, those are two different metrics to measure by. But for folks who don't know you, because we do actually have a lot of brand new listeners after a particular social media event late last year.
Nice.
Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
All right, yeah. I am Jahara Matisek, but I go by my pilot call sign, Franky. I am a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. I've been in just over 20 years. I currently work at U.S. Northern Command, which is unusual use of my skill set, given that I have a PhD in political science from Northwestern that the Air Force paid for. So I taught at the Air Force Academy, and then most recently I taught at the U.S. Naval War College. And by all accounts, I'm the most published active duty officer serving. I've got 2 books and about 160 articles, primarily on strategy and warfare. And over the last year or two, because I know the admin doesn't care about security assistance, I've gotten really into researching and writing about the U.S. defense industrial base. And it sounds like that's why I'm here today, is because you came across something I wrote about
Yes.
the American industrial base and it not being what we all hoped and thought it was.
That is indeed true. And sir, I must admit, I am flabbergasted. I am so confused because, I thought everything was great. We have some of the most brilliant business minds in America in the current political regime. We just knocked over Venezuela, flew in, badass ops, stole their president back to New York. Our shit don't stink. There's nothing we can do wrong. So I was shocked to learn that there might be some cracks in the defense industrial base.
Well,
and even if there are, the 1.5 trillion budget should fill all those in, like problem solved next year, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, on one hand, you were right. We can do a lot of great war stuff for about a week. So tactically, we're awesome at doing war in a week or less. So to our adversaries, please do a war with us that lasts a week or less. Anything longer than that, we get ADD, we run out of missiles. It gets really hard to sustain the American warfighting machine.
That makes sense. Back when I did drumline, we'd be playing for like 14 hours a day doing drum corps rehearsals, and our instructors would like complain about their hands. Like, you guys aren't even playing. And they're like, well, yeah, we have instructor chops now. Like, we can play 2 bars really clean. After that, we got nothing. That's all we can do. I feel like America's gotten to the point where we've got the instructor chops, if I can torture that metaphor anymore. But so I actually came across an article, and you actually started to come out yesterday too on a similar topic. What is it? Oh, yes. How to Fix America's Broken Arsenal. I think that came out last month in Foreign Policy.
Yes, that was the Foreign Policy. And then yesterday in Foreign Policy Research Institute, FPRI, I wrote an article with a guy that had just worked in the National Security Council, but it had been purged by the most incoming admin. And he was working on resilience for U.S. infrastructure and the industrial base. And so he happens to be like a neighbor actually around my place here in Colorado Springs now. We got to talking about the resilience and the industrial base aspect and sort of all of the gaps, and that a lot of policymakers like to say, hey, put some resilience on that PowerPoint slide or in that strategy document, and obviously it'll take care of itself. And I don't know if you noticed in the FPRI article, I sarcastically wrote that a lot of policymakers like to put this in PowerPoints and mention like resilience and just hope the resilience fairies will go out and do the resilience across the industrial base. And I was surprised that it actually made the final editor's cut in the articles. So to any aspiring writers, you can slip in a couple smart ass comments and you'd be surprised that most editors will apparently let it get through now.
you get one or two. You got to get one or two. It's crazy times.
It is. And that's probably why they let me get away with it, because that's how crazy bad our American defense industrial base is right now. Is people just think you just throw money at it, the fairies will fix the industrial base. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So it almost shocks me that we still have to have this conversation, because it was several years ago when war in Ukraine's kicking off and they need artillery shells. And we realized we could not produce 155 millimeter artillery shells. Very low tech, very, very dumb technology, doesn't require a lot of sophisticated stuff to do it, but we couldn't ramp up production, and we didn't even have a factory that we could go retool and solve that problem. And reading your articles, it sounds like things haven't gotten better. So could you tell us, what is the problem with America's defense industrial base? Because it seems to do really well for Lockheed Martin shareholders.
Well, that's a part of the big five, like prime contractors. They're making the big, fancy, exquisite weapon systems, right? Boeing, Lockheed, General Dynamics, or General Atomics, or whatever. So you have the big primes. They're making the big weapon systems. The problem is, once you get past the big five, it's, depending on who you ask, and this is why the foreign policy article got written, depending on who you ask, we probably have 60,000 companies that are part of the defense industrial base, or we probably have over 200,000 companies that are part of the U.S. defense industrial base. And the reason why there's a 60 to 200,000 gap is because we kind of don't really know what happens once you get past one of the prime contractors, because this is intellectual property and sort of proprietary information. So the big primes are legally not required to tell the U.S. government who are their tier 2 and tier 3 sub-firms they contract out for a lot of these parts and pieces and things like that. So the impetus for writing this article was the fact that, and I can't say who, but somebody from the U.S. government reached out to me and my research team at the Payne Institute for Public Policy about, hey, do you have a methodology to figure out who all of the subprimes are for doing the defense industrial base? And a lot of the questions they were asking us, it made me and Morgan Bazillion, who's the director at the Payne Institute, just go, holy shit, this is bad that a senior U.S. government official that's in charge of this part of the economy doesn't know. And so the original title of the article was actually going to be Unpacking the Black Box of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, because it's crazy wild that, that government officials don't actually know what's going on inside the U.S. Defense Industrial Base. And so, that's actually led to us doing a lot of writing that I think symbolically kind of actually represents the bigger problem. Like, for example, if we talk about what does it take to go from the mine to a missile? So, if you're making a missile, just one piece or component is probably going to be titanium ore from a Chinese mine that then has to go through a Chinese ore processing plant. And then at some point that powder then ends up maybe in Australia or in the US, and that gets then refined into the actual metal. But then now you have to take it to a fabrication factory plant and turn it into like that high purity metal that you need for, industrial military grade standards. And then that little component then goes to a machining mill. There's only a few like these machining mills that are actually certified to produce the type of component you need for that missile. And then that plugs into one of the primes at some point. But that's just one little piece or component of a missile.
Yeah. So when you said 60,000 to 250,000, what percentage of those companies are American?
That's also the problem.
And then we can talk, well, and it goes a step further, like American company, but they're not based in America. So American owned, but activity happens overseas.
Yeah, and that's the problem. We also don't know that. If I had to guess, it's probably the number of US actually have an actual factory floor or headquarters in the US. That number is probably closer to that 60,000 or less number.
Dang.
So it seems like the bulk of the U.S. Defense Industrial Base isn't actually in the United States. It's in Europe. It's in Australia. It's in allies and partners. But even again, that becomes the bigger problem, is because so much of the minerals and rare earths and stuff you need to make a lot of these components for the Defense Industrial Base basically comes from China.
Yeah.
Or Chinese owned companies in South America or elsewhere in Asia and Africa. That's what it becomes even more difficult. Again, that's why I tell you the story of the mine to missile, is the fact that China is such a huge part of getting the ore out of the ground to, at some point, we have to pretend that metal is not Chinese made or produced or refined or smelted, at some point, and then it ends up in a U.S. factory, and we say this is an American-made missile.
Yeah, I remember there's an article a while back where they found out that there was a rare earth magnet sourced from China in a batch of F-35 fighters.
Yes,
and it took them forever and a day to figure it out. When somebody realized, like, how do we miss this? And it's really hard to audit that stuff. I was working with a company once, and we were selling a piece of telecommunications equipment, and we found out there was an SFP in it that was produced in, I think, Shenzhen. It's in one of the blacklisted places, and it's like, oh crap, we need to get rid of this thing. Well, then we actually had a significant problem. Like, well, how do you find a replacement component? It was actually really hard to find something that wasn't produced in a blacklisted area that could actually meet spec. And that was in the private sector with access to everything on the planet. And, the faultiness there was almost discovered by accident. And I don't think the government ever had visibility into it.
No, and that then becomes the best part of the story, is because it was, so much of the Chinese were involved in sort of like the supply chain to make an F-35. The Pentagon kind of threw up its hands and just said, F it, let's just have a waiver. And it wasn't until literally summer of last year, the U.S. was like, we're going to have to basically get into the what I like to call now the China Light model. Mm-hmm. The U.S. government basically put together a deal with MP Materials to source those rare earth magnets domestically. But it required a few $1 billion from the U.S. government and other private finance to basically subsidize the creation of a mine and factories and smelters to produce these magnets, essentially.
Nice.
And that's kind of what's going to be the future of the U.S. defense industrial base is the Trump administration basically putting together sort of these public-private partner fusion-funded projects to essentially onshore or friendshore the U.S. defense industrial base. But that, again, is what I would call a China light strategy, because the U.S. government is going to get involved in industry in a way that we have not seen since probably World War II.
Nice.
If you didn't hear, literally a day or two ago, President Trump announced a $12 billion investment in redoing the American national defense stockpile for minerals and rare earths. At the height of the Cold War, the national defense stockpile of minerals and rare earths was valued at about $700 billion in today's dollars. Right now, it's about $900 million worth of minerals.
Damn.
So the $12 billion is a good sort of initial injection to try and get the national defense stockpile of critical minerals and rare earths that we use across the industrial base kind of back up and running. And it sounds like, again, I don't know how this is going to work or play out, because it just got announced the other day. But ideally, if we're doing this defense industrial base for American security and deterrence and the ability to sustain a war against a near peer competitor like the Chinese, it sounds like we're going to have to basically stockpile enough minerals to last us 2 years of war at a minimum. That sounds like that's going to be the bare minimum standard. So $12 billion is not enough for the U.S. economy or U.S. military to do 2 years of war. It's going to have to be probably $120 billion.
Yeah. Well, another thing you brought up in the article is some of these issues, it's not a matter of capital. It's a matter of you can throw as much money as you want. You still need the factories. You still need skilled labor. Like, you need an entire retooling of the industrial base. And I'm listening to everything you're saying, and it sounds like we're trying to stockpile what we need to continue to fight wars with the type of high-end weaponry that we're used to. But thinking back to World War II, we didn't win World War II because we had better stuff than the Germans in any of the fancy categories. We had more reliable stuff in the small arms range, more reliable vehicles, and just more of it. And as we're looking towards great power competition, do you think anyone's considered the idea that, hey, let's just fight with cheaper shit? Like, I remember the CEO of Palantir going on Joe Rogan and talking about how they're designing weapons, and one of the rules for their weapon systems is that it has to be able to be manufactured with the current tools in any American auto plant. And actually, I had a guy on, Ethan Thornton, I think, a young 21-year-old guy that dropped out of MIT to start his own drone company, and that was one of the things that they're talking about too. Is like cheap weapons that you can produce with the existing industrial base. Doesn't seem like anybody in government, though, has taken that idea seriously. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yes. This is called the high-low mix of weaponry that has been a perverse discussion across not just the U.S. military, but, almost any military in the world. Is, the U.S., every military likes to have its exquisite high-end weapon systems, right? Because it allows me, as a pilot, like, for example, to kill you or blow you up from thousands of miles away. That's ideal, right? Because that's what these exquisite long-range weapon systems usually do. It allows me to have a very low-risk approach to warfighting, so I can blow you up or kill you from thousands of miles away on the other side of the planet. The problem, of course, is those are exquisite, very expensive weapons, and an artillery shell or a bullet is 0.1% of the cost of that exquisite weapon system, right? And then that is the trouble, is going back to the big five primes. The big five primes don't want to make cheap artillery shells. They want to make F-35s. They want to make Patriot missiles. They want to make these weapons that cost $5 to $10 million a shot, because to them, that's how they're organized, as a prime. So going back to the artillery shell example, it's crazy to think that we're almost 4 years into the war, and the Pentagon wanted to go from producing 20,000 shells a year of the 155 Mike artillery shells to 100,000, and the goal was to hit 100,000 last year. We missed that mark. We were at 60,000 shells a month.
Jesus.
And that's despite the US government throwing literally $6 billion at the problem. So we literally threw $6 billion at the problem of making artillery shells. And the bottleneck in this case wasn't actually people making the shells or the factories. It was the fact that the biggest choke points was getting enough of the casings made to make the shells, and enough of the energetic propellant that you need to actually make artillery shells go boom, boom.
All right. So riddle me this, because the juxtaposition here is just mind blowing to me. And I don't know if you thought about this, but compared to the U.S. trying to increase artillery shells, and let's look at what Russia's been doing. They've been cut off from the global financial system, blockaded, sanctioned up the ass, yada, yada, yada. They've been in this all-out meat grinder war in Ukraine, and somehow they've not only maintained their ability to produce military equipment and put it in the field, but their GDP has actually gone up. What is wrong where Russia is adapting to this better than we are? Like, this seems wonky.
Well, I mean, Russia's a big country. They have lots of neighbors like India.
We're a big country, hell.
Yeah. But I mean, Russia's a big country, and they have lots of neighbors that aren't sanctioned by the war. And if anything, they're exploiting the Russian economic vulnerability at this point. So I believe the Indians are buying the Russian oil and natural gas for about a 60% discount. I believe that the Chinese are also getting about a 60% discount. And then, of course, the fact that India and China can supply whatever chips, minerals, parts, whatever they need that they make to the Russians. And then, of course, there's all the old sort of like Soviet satellite states like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, that are not being sanctioned. So people that act as middlemen in those countries just buy washing machines and other things from the European Union, and then they just sell that to the Russians for a markup, of course. So business is good if you're any country that's able to buy whatever you want from the Americans or the Europeans or the Canadians, because then you just repackage it, slap on a 3 to 5%, middleman fee, and you sell to the Russians, and the Russians can keep on doing their war machine. Now, over time, this is going to take a toll on the Russian economy. Yes, their GDP is growing, but that's just because they have a ton of resources they can dig out of the ground. It is going to take a toll on their economy because, again, everything I just described is a market inefficiency. A market inefficiency like this, where you're not getting, top dollar for your oil and natural gas, and then you're having to buy goods from the West through basically a middleman in the Persian Gulf or in one of the stands, or China and India. That does take a toll on your economy in the long term. But right now, they're just kind of going with that short-term approach of burn it all to keep the war machine going, and it's not impacting them because they have 140 million people they can burn through, and they have a pretty big country that they don't care about at this point, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But the war machine for Russia just keeps grinding on, and it does sort of teach us lessons from sort of a Western perspective that if we really had an incentive to really shut down the Russian war machine, we would actually prevent Kazakhstan from buying, European and American cars and then just reselling them to the Russians. And then the Russians basically strip out the parts and put it into Shahed drones and other missiles they're making. Right.
Mm-hmm. We talk about it too, like the efficiency of the economy. But, one of the problems that you brought up in your article was that we've actually made the American economy too efficient in order to respond to any sort of catastrophe that hits us. So we saw that with COVID. We saw that with the banking crisis. We've seen it with 155 shells that we just talked about. What's wrong with how we're looking at our economy? Because it seems like we had this big peace dividend in the 90s that we were expecting, It never showed up. Now we're paying 10x what we should for stuff that doesn't work all the time. And we've got an industrial base that's not ready to stand up to our main geopolitical rivals. What are we getting wrong here with how we're approaching our economy?
Well, that's the balance between efficiency and resilience.
Mhm.
Efficiency is very free market based, right? You let the free hand of the market, it's laissez-faire. You let the market determine what is efficient for the number of factories and machines and people you have. And then resilience is very much something that the private sector doesn't want to do because it's not profitable to have a bunch of factories and people that are sitting idle waiting for that order to come in the future. And so when you think about efficiency versus resilience, the free market is not going to provide resilience as a charity. And once you sort of accept that mind shift, then you kind of have to go towards what, again, I keep calling the China Light model, which is the US government has to be actively involved in the entire defense industrial base, from the big primes all the way down to a lot of the ma and pa sub tier 2 and 3 firms that are actually the real base of the defense industrial base, because they're making the parts, the ball bearings, the little pieces that you need to actually make the bigger weapon systems work. And obviously they're able to produce usually artillery shells, things like that, because that's what they do at their level. The problem, of course, even within that context of what I tell you, is the fact that as much as the Pentagon is bragging about cutting all these rules and acquisitions and things like that, getting into the defense industrial base and staying in the defense industrial base is still a perilous business model to have, because the U.S. government still keeps on using continuing resolutions to fund the government and the military. That means if you are a company or a small mom and pop firm, you don't know what your orders are going to be the next year or the next 5 years. So it sort of perversely disincentivizes you to invest in your company and invest in a labor pool, because you don't know what it's going to be like for the next 5 years. If we could actually go back to a proper funding a government and the military model, you could actually make these contracts 5 to 10 years out, so that companies and firms will be like, oh, I can hire and invest at a certain rate because I know I'm going to get paid no matter what. But since we keep doing these sort of short-term funding cycles and contracts for all these firms, they're doing the bare minimum to meet the bare minimum of the contract requirements and orders. And then let's throw in this other layer of bullshit, because we're both in the military, the bureaucracy and the rules and the laws. A law was passed a couple of years ago that was imposing a huge burden on a lot of these mom and pop firms to adhere to sort of this like cybersecurity requirement for keeping, invoices like secure. And it was basically, it cost the average mom and pop firm about $100,000 a year to be compliant with this law, which again, if you don't have promises of long-term orders, that actually forced a lot of companies out of the defense industrial base, because they're like, yeah, my profit margin is not enough to absorb $100,000 out of pocket to adhere to this new law. President Trump actually had to rescind this law this past summer. That's how bad it is. They literally had to rescind like the cybersecurity law because too many companies were quitting the defense industrial base.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're all going to come back, because they know there's other bullshit rules and laws they have to deal with. And that's kind of the weird part of this, is we're caught between the free market and also just more government regulation and rules. And it kind of, what I think is, you kind of have to throw the baby out with the bathwater at this point. We kind of need to just destroy the entire system and go back to like the base of we need to make weapons and munitions. Let's focus on that. And then we can worry about sort of protecting, intellectual property, the proprietary sort of the way of making these things, because it's just preventing us from having a war machine that we should be able to have, but we can't, because we just put so many roadblocks in the way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think something that folks don't always appreciate is like laws like what you just mentioned. Yeah, you can make a really good argument that, cybersecurity is important, this, that, and the other thing. But if you look at what the DoD does with cybersecurity, and you look at regular corporate standards are for cybersecurity. DoD is lagging so far behind. You actually have to like dumb stuff down to become compliant with what they're asking for. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And rules and regulations, a big reason. I know this because I've talked to some people who've done it. A big reason why they're on the books is because big primes push for them because it raises the barrier entry to market. If compliance becomes the number one barrier, then they don't have to compete on cost or quality. It's just on regulatory compliance for its own sake. So there is this perverse incentive structure with the big five defense contractors. The more regulation, the better, because then they can't be removed from anything. And it is so frustrating to watch all the money that gets dumped down that hole because of that.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of times, for like a smaller sub tier 2 or 3 firm, they'd be able to absorb that cost if they could write that cost into the if they could write the cost of compliance into that contract. But if their contract's only for $500,000, they can't say, oh, we have to also charge you an extra $150,000 to hire one person to keep us compliant with all of your laws and rules. Like the fact that like a quarter of the contract would just be you hiring one person to not actually do anything, just to be compliant. Whereas when you are pulling in tens of billions of dollars, you hiring a couple of compliance officers, that's already kind of a part of your overcharging the U.S. government rate anyways.
Yeah. Oh man, it's painful to watch.
And that's actually why everything we're talking about is kind of why a lot of GoFos that normally retire and go into the defense industry are not going to the defense industry now, because they've now realized, let's bypass that and go direct to the mine. So a lot of GoFos that are retiring over the last year or two, when I give you like that mine to missile story, I think they've realized that the real profit and money now is in the mines and sort of the upstream sort of processing parts to actually making the missile, not just actually making the missile. That makes any sense to you?
Yeah. What do you mean by GoFos for folks?
Oh, sorry. General officers and flag officers. So basically all the retired admirals and generals. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm usually good about not using acronyms.
I know. You're good. You're good. I've gotten better at calling them out for the audience because they send me comments and emails now. So.
But yeah, so a lot of retired admirals and generals aren't going to Boeing and Lockheed. They're just going to random mom and pop factory or to mining companies and trying to figure out a way to sort of say, we can provide the U.S. Defense Industrial Base X, Y, and Z minerals or parts or components that have to meet a certain grade and also have to be from the U.S. or from an ally. That's kind of where all the money is going now at this point. But of course, people also don't realize, again, when we talk about from mine to missile, why this is so hard. It takes right now on average 29 years to open a mine in America. Even if we threw out all the laws and rules like protecting the environment and, because not everybody likes to have a mine or a smelter in their backyard, right? Even if you threw out all those rules.
What are you talking about? Those are great assets to have in your neighborhood.
Yeah. It still
takes
to
property values.
Yeah. Yeah. It still takes elsewhere in the world where they don't have any laws or rules, 10 to 15 years.
Dang.
That's so we can't just be like, hey, we need a bunch of lithium because we need it for for all the batteries and Teslas out there. That's going to take, it's a decade or two project at a minimum. And again, that's assuming we throw out all the rules and we throw everything we got at it. It would take us a while. So that's the other problem with all this is we actually have almost all the minerals and rare earths we need to make anything. The problem is all the NIMBYs, right? All the NIMBYs are like, not in my backyard, right? And then we also have all these laws and rules, for good cause, because we decided a while ago that we would rather let the Chinese and Indians destroy their environment and let their employees fucking die in the coal mines than Americans having to do that. So that's going to be the next big pivot. I think next year or two is we're going to have to start accepting big mining projects all across the United States. And it's gonna be sort of an uphill battle because a lot of communities are not going to want these big, ugly, stinky mines and polluting mines in their neighborhoods. And I don't know how that's going to play out.
That's going to be fun to watch folks get into fights in Congress. The lobbyists are going to have a field day with that.
Yes, they are. So I guess business will be booming for the mining industry at this point, I think. And
Dang.
for consultants, if they want to hire you or me as consultants or advisors on this, we can.
What a
tell
great
them,
idea.
I know.
You can email me at no. Yeah, no, it's God, such an interesting topic. Another thing you brought up in your article, and I thought this was fascinating. You're talking about strategic infrastructure and how the government needs to start managing America's strategic infrastructure differently and viewing it as a key national security asset, not just something they can tap into as needed. What do you mean by strategic infrastructure? What is that?
So strategic infrastructure right now is just basically it's the power grid. It's the oil and gas pipelines and refineries, things that we consider to be part of like the core pillars of industry and economic and military power. The problem is we don't treat any of these factories that make parts and components like for missiles or artillery as strategic infrastructure. And that actually takes me off another tangent because I wrote another article for FPRI a few weeks ago that said we actually also need to treat data centers as strategic infrastructure, because data centers have basically kind of become the bedrock of the U.S. military, because we're all about joint all domain operations, MDO. We're all about using the cloud now for everything we do when it comes to all domain awareness and conducting military operations. The whole sort of like, find, fix, and fire targeting, like everything we do now is basically through the cloud. And here's the big, dirty, open secret. We're using Amazon web servers in Virginia that are dual use because the commercial sector is using the exact same servers the U.S. military is using for basically war fighting, for the command and control of war fighting. And data centers are not being treated as strategic infrastructure. And it basically is it's the bullets or the jet fuel of the U.S. military in the digital age, because we're so dependent on these data centers. I mean, it's crazy here at Northcom how much of what we do, it relies on the cloud and data centers and the issues that we experience because we don't have enough a data center power to actually do what we think we want to do from a combatant command level. And that's an issue at every combatant command right now, is they have all these aspirations of what sort of future warfighting looks like in the digital age. And the biggest constraint is they don't have the electricity and they don't have the space or the ability to get all of the data servers into where they want them or need them to be able to do sort of this, this high-tech warfighting stuff.
Yeah, we were. I was working with a company, and we were looking at the Army's next generation command and control contract, which is their number one priority. At least it was for a hot minute, and they've dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into this thing. Of course, all went to Anduril and Palantir. So we have new big primes. Yay! They're not being called that yet, but that's kind of they're the new kids.
They're
on the block.
Digital primes. Yeah, I have to deal with Maven from Palantir every day at work, and
it's a whole thing. So now we got from 5 to like the 5+2. But we sit in these meetings and all this stuff that they can do, it's incredible, but it all relies on data connectivity, and all the data has to live somewhere, and nobody's even talking about that. It's like we just assume that's going to get figured out by somebody somewhere. Industry just solve that and don't really tell us how, and we're just going to focus on how we put bullets on foreheads. Which is nice, but at some point you have to graduate from Ranger School and start figuring out how to do this shit against China.
And again, going back to, because you need all these data centers and you need electricity to make these things, not to mention the cooling. So they need water and electricity. There's infrastructure you need to put in place if you want to have more of these data centers. And guess what? China is the choke point. You need a lot of copper, and a lot of other weird rare earth minerals to make these data centers work. Guess what? It all comes from China.
Dang.
So, and by the way, to even make these transformers, you need to support the data centers. Those are, I think we primarily buy those from the Koreans and the Japanese. The lag time to be in line to buy those and get delivery is about 2 to 4 years.
Oofta.
So even if you're a combatant command that says we're doing digital warfighting next year, it's like actually you're doing it in 4 to 5 years, because the contracting acquisitions process is a pain in the ass. Then we have to figure out how to source that copper and other rare earths from a non-Chinese source. So now this is looking more like 5 years, and then at some point it's going to turn into 10 years because the whole thing will blow up at some point, because this is such a hard thing to do. And of course, as you know, you were in the military. Most officers at any posting or job are only there for 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, if you have a 10-year project, there's no stakeholder that's going to back that.
Yeah,
because no one's going to benefit from it. And by the time it happens, it's 10 years out of date.
Yeah, so then you become dependent on that crusty GS-12 or GS-15. That's usually a retired E9 or retired lieutenant colonel, and you don't know how motivated they are to actually see this project get done in 5 to 10 years, right? I mean, we've all encountered like that crusty GS-12, GS-15 that is just very happy and content doing the bare minimum for any project management, because they're just like, yeah, that colonel or general can put their thumb on me, but I know they're only here for 2 to 4 years. Yep. So I will keep doing the slow turtle pace of this project management or this acquisitions program, because there's no oversight or accountability for that. And that's where I think that's where this really gets messed up. Even if you fix and solve everything else, how do you solve the accountability and oversight for these things not being done on time? Because if you're a general or a colonel that is overseeing one of these projects, you're maybe only doing it for a year or two. So you do whatever you need to do during that year or two to look really good, to move on to that next, bigger, more important job. And there's no ramifications for the whole thing falling apart after you leave, because you were doing the short-term gain approach of doing everything you can to look good on schedule and cost efficiency and being cost effective, so it looks good on your performance eval. Then you bounce, and then everyone has to deal with the ramifications of your terrible decisions after you leave. But there's no accountability. Like, that never follows you to your next assignment. You can't really get in trouble unless you did something literally illegal.
So it sounds like we've got a confluence of problems here. We've got a military that needs to get ready for great power competition, but to do that we need to be able to mass produce simple stuff, but we don't have the skilled labor or necessarily the factories to do it. Assuming that we could get the raw resources for it. We've got a defense industrial base that, as it currently stands, wants to build big, shiny stuff that's really complicated and proprietary for high profit margins while boxing out everyone else. We got a regulatory process for acquisitions that is, I won't even talk about how painful it is because I don't want to start crying on air. And we've got and we've got a military which is very dedicated to war fighting, but I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. There's a level of bureaucratic mastery that you need to solve and to navigate in some of these ecosystems. And no one in the military who actually lives and dies by this is ever around long enough to have that mastery.
Exactly.
And then theoretically, a mature Congress could step in and fix this, but I don't believe in fairy tales. So I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime.
It sounds like the resilience fairies are going to go out there and make the industrial base more resilient. And
the regime wants to counter China, but they want to do that by taking over Greenland and pissing off all of our NATO allies, which is just brilliant, just fucking brilliant. But anyway, so
and if you want the real icing on the cake, if I'm being aspirational and I want to find an industrial base, a ferry out there to fix this, the submarine industrial base is more messed up, not because of the metal and the parts. It's because making a big submarine is really hard. And it's something that kind of goes back to, like, you need people to make these things. You can't give it to a robot. And so you need people to actually put the bolts into the ship, so right now the U.S. Navy is supposed to be able to produce 2 submarines a year. We're producing 1.2 a year. And the expectation is, because of AUKUS and that whole partnership of making subs with the Australians, is that we'll go up to making 3 or 4 a year. We're going to need at least 200,000 machinists just to do like the nuts and bolts of these subs the next decade. The U.S. economy and the Australian economy and the Brits do not have a pipeline to produce enough people to meet that requirement just to make submarine. I'm not even talking about all the other boats we have to make that we're also not making enough of, because we don't have enough machinists to make those other boats we need to make besides the subs. So we literally have wishes without the backbone of just people that want to do this job, because unfortunately you can't Zoom call the like the nuts and bolts of making a sub. I wish you could. I really wish you could. And again, these are high paying jobs right out of high school. But we don't have a pipeline to tell kids in high school, hey, you don't need to go to college to make six figures right out of high school. You can go live in the Northeast and go make submarines. It's unglamorous, but you'll make over $100,000 a year. Oh, by the way, anyone that's touching that sub has to have a security clearance and a background check. So now that takes out about a quarter of the American population.
Yep.
So we just can't do this. And I honestly think Congress would literally need to come down and say every high school in America needs to have a tradecraft program to do something, to provide the skills and abilities to sort of tell kids, hey, you can get into the pipeline of, you don't have to go to history class. You can go to like machining class, learn the tradecraft of making stuff, because that's just not going to get replaced by robots anytime soon. And we need people to do this. But of course, if you want to do that, now you have to go find people to run those programs at those high schools. So it still becomes a labor manpower issue. Because again, you can wish all the trade craft and machining skills out into the universe, but okay, who's going to teach this?
Well, maybe that's the next H-1 visa program. Instead of, coders and stuff like that, we're bringing in, master machinists from overseas and giving them visas to come run our high school programs. That might actually be a good first step, but
I like that. That's actually a good idea.
Why not? Shoot. Yeah, that'd be better for everybody, actually.
Yeah.
All right. I'm
gonna bet we could take them all from Russia too, because the average Russian doesn't want to be there anyways.
That's true. We could think about the amount of free intel you could get just by interviewing people for the visa process. That would be an intelligence.
Yes.
Oh, we're onto something. We are onto something here. Okay. I'm calling Schumer right after this.
Yes.
Text my buddy who works for him.
Yeah.
Like, yo, Broseph, I got
whoever
one
wants
for
to send us theoretical internet money for these ideas, we just did a $10,000 consulting session for free.
We can edit this part out and put it behind a paywall. But so, let's start brainstorming though. So we got this problem. We've just spent 44 minutes talking about just how fucked we are, and not the fun way. So, assuming that this is going to take 20 years to turn around, let's assume that we can do it, because there's nothing that we can't do. We just always like to do it the most painful way possible, because we're sadists in America. But assuming that we had 20 years to turn this around, what do you think that we need to do in the next 3 to get started? I think we actually just came up with one good idea, but
it requires a congressional action to provide a lot of incentives and programs to convince kids out of high school, you don't need to go to college. You should go to like a tradecraft school and become qualified as a machinist. The other way Congress could actually incentivize this, if you want to bypass the high school approach, is you could also provide a lot of industry sort of subsidies and payments to be like, hey, we're willing to guarantee you 5 to 10 years of work if you invest in your labor pool and market, right? So it would have to be basically, again, it's very much a China light. The U.S. government would basically have to start guaranteeing everybody across the defense industrial base lots of money to invest and scale up with promises for 5 to 10 years of payments that they'll get their money back and then some, make it profitable. And that's kind of an uncomfortable thing, but it sounds like in this new age, I think we're cool with socialism and communism in the private market, comrade, right? That's kind of what we're doing, right? That's what we're going towards. We're basically going to have U.S. government heavily involved in industry. Now, there is an inherent danger with this because, as we know, the defense industry loves to be corrupt. Right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, cost plus is the best thing that ever happened to them.
Yes. So, how do you watchdog that, right? How do you have oversight? How do you have inspector generals that also aren't taking bribes from the industrial base to look the other way when they find out that the contractors, cost plus profit isn't just cost plus profit.
Yeah.
That's the issue is, again, it goes back to accountability. How do you do this in a way that, incentivizes the free market to not be corrupt and do the right thing? Well, that's where you have to have sort of 5 to 10 year time horizons of guaranteed contracts and money to these companies.
Yeah. I think part of it's got to be too, it has to go to companies that are not the big 5 contractors, but I don't
Yes.
know. So I'm thinking this through in real time, and I almost feel like what we need to see is a more mature Congress that could actually address these issues openly and honestly. But for that to happen, the majority of current congressional leadership needs to rotate out because
Oh, 100%.
they're so entrenched. I cannot even begin to imagine them trying to address this problem.
No, and that's why it's awesome here in Colorado Springs. There's a recently retired Army officer, Matt Kavanaugh. If you've heard of Matt Kavanaugh, he's gonna run as a Democrat against the incumbent Jeff Crank, and he's already, as his platform, he says, "I'm only going to be in Congress if I get elected for 3 terms and leave," because from his perspective and point of view, 3 terms is where you can do the most good. Anything else after that, you just get caught up in the swamp of insider trading and sort of doing things for your own financial benefit. And I think that is kind of the problem with Congress. They all need to rotate out. They've all gotten rich. I mean, I'm sure you've heard that if you follow every trade from like the Nancy Pelosi,
she's blowing the market out of the water. She's an investment guru.
Yeah.
How fortunate are we that we have such brilliant people running the country?
I know. And,
I feel better already.
It's actually funny you mentioned that because I was thinking about, like, is insider trading going to apply to the U.S. military? Because you know how we have like the poly market stuff now. You can bet on, like, is the U.S. going to invade Iran on this day or that day? And I was just thinking, like, can the U.S. military, can service members that are going to be, if you're like a SEAL or a Green Beret, like, well, I know I just got orders for this mission. I'm putting $10,000 down on the invasions happening in the next hour. I'm about to get paid, son.
Text wife like, hey babe, they're about to put us in the isolation chamber for planning. Don't know what yet, but play a bet, baby. Final message to the wife. Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be. Yeah. So someone else was talking too, like the impact of poly market on elections. Like if you're betting on the election outcomes, like down to these minute details in specific districts, like, and you're a poll worker there, how incentivized could you be to do something shady and make a ton of money on a very small change? If you do that at scale, you can delegitimize the entire system.
Yeah. Yeah. If you monetize everything, there are incentives to do things that benefit you.
Yeah. Okay. I was trying to like turn this around and get back to an uplifting point, and we just find like more dark corners to run into.
No, the industrial base is depressing. The state of affairs for what you can gamble on now is depressing. I mean, at least it's a sunny day in Colorado for me right now. It's my day off from work.
Ah, cool. It's snowing here. It's been snowing for like a week straight. But that's my fault for living outside of Syracuse. We get snow, but we have like no fun mountains. So it's like not even fun like Colorado, where it's great to have snow. Go skiing.
Yeah.
Love Colorado. But okay, so assuming we've got this more mature Congress that we're fantasizing about right now, but let's say 5 years from now, we've had a generational turnover. We're past the Trump years. Vance didn't get elected, so we're on to a whole new political class. And what does this Congress need to do? So we have to have the skill set in the labor force. So we have to have some sort of education program for blue collar work. So we actually have folks that can do stuff. And we need to start looking at the factories that produces our military hardware and treat that the same way that we treat our power plants, water treatment, sewage, all that stuff.
Yep. And then we also need to basically unpack that black box of the defense industrial base, which means laws need to pass, and there needs to be basically a defense industrial base agency that's dedicated to forcing any company that works or is a part of the supply chain for the defense industrial base to give up the proprietary information on what it takes to make their stuff. That to me is actually the most important part, because if you force them to give up the proprietary information that, again, the U.S. government will store very securely, if you force them to do that in a crisis, they can then take that proprietary information and find other factories, other industry domestically and around the world to make those components, those parts, to easily plug and chug into the defense industrial base.
I'm curious who does a better job of getting taxpayers to fund their R&D and then protecting their intellectual property as if it's their own. They actually did it all by themselves. Is it the pharmaceutical industry or is it the defense industrial base? I'm not sure which, but I know a lawyer for Pfizer, and I'm going to hit her up and ask her, who do you think does it better?
That is a fantastic question. But I think if we could actually force that, that actually would be the most beneficial thing long term, because then you could be like, all right, we can 3D print a lot of this. We could, basically put factories together, just our 3D printing parts that we need, and again, that's where you can do that type of deeper level strategic analysis to think through what are the most critical choke points in producing weapon system X, Y, or Z. You can actually plan for wars way better and think about what is going to be the biggest disruption to that. So I can give you like another awesome example. There's this very weird, the rare earth called lanthanum. Lanthanum is used in refineries to make jet fuel. And it's used to make jet fuel efficiently because of a weird cracking process. Again, I'm not that kind of scientist, but almost all the lanthanum comes from China. So, and again, when you produce jet fuel, you need this lanthanum to basically produce the jet fuel. Now, can you produce jet fuel without it? Yes, you're just not as effective or as efficient producing jet fuel. So again, in a war of China, if you need jet fuel, which you normally do because you use fucking jet fuel for the entire Air Force and almost all the aircraft the Navy uses, you also use it in tanks. There's a lot of things that you actually use Humvees. Across every service to power the generators. You're using jet fuel, JP8. You would not be able to meet wartime requirements because you would not be able to produce jet fuel at the rate you want, because the Chinese would say no more lanthanum for you. So now refineries are forced to have to find alternatives to lanthanum, which do exist, but now it makes their process for making jet fuel more expensive and less efficient and less effective. And that's usually what happens all the time with things like this is, you can find substitutes. It just ends up costing you more and you can't surge as much as you want.
Yeah, but if the government had the IP for all these defense systems and how they're produced and maintained and operated, they could actually plan and forecast what those contingencies would be and what the alternative production timetables would be, and then also use that to develop their operational plans and concepts.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. We're coming up on the top of the hour, but so Jahara, Franky, Matisek with the hot take that the government that funds defense should own the intellectual property for the shit that it funds and pays for.
Yes.
Fascinating take. Controversial. I don't know where he gets these crazy ideas, but links to both the articles will be in the show notes. Hey, man, love you having you back on. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, man. Like I say, every time we talk, I'll see you again in 6 months. I enjoy this. So if you can have me on as a biannual guest, I'm totally down to do it. I'm enjoying this.
I appreciate it.
I'm glad someone's listening or wants to hear me talk about it.
Cool.